I'm Lisa Senecal.
And I'm Maya May, and We're Speaking starts now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to We're Speaking.
Hello, hello.
So, last night, Republicans, they had a night. One. We'll give
one
them
night, yes.
One. And they took the opportunity to exert their power at the polls. So, man, I hope everybody felt like we had a wake-up call this morning. Yeah. Okay. It's still going on. He's not the former guy. No more saying that. He is still the guy for the Republicans. And, the truth is the Republicans have for a really long time known how to tap into that power that they showed last night. And it's the power of fear. That's what that's the playbook that they always go back to. Yep. And, they never let, annoying little things like the truth and preserving democracy, being moral, don't let any of that get in the way.
Yeah. God forbid that get in the way. And meanwhile, the Democrats, it's basically have their face buried in the 48 laws of cower. That's what I'm going to call it. Not the 48 laws of power. It's the 48 laws of cower. And the thing is, nobody wants to join this book club. Nobody wants that. And
even if there's wine.
Yeah. That would be, no, definitely not. Not even with wine, though. I've been drinking some wine lately. Some wine. But we're not giving up. Just because I had wine doesn't mean we're not giving up. We're giving up. The show, we're not giving up. Tonight, we're talking about power, the good kind, and how we can exert it basically before it's too late. Because we have to remember, being pro-democracy, it's the moral high ground, okay? And Democrats own that, and we have to act like it. So let's not be afraid to build our community around that.
Yeah, building community around the moral high ground. That sounds like a much nicer place to live than with, on Planet GOP.
Don't like it.
Don't like it. No, not going there. In just a few minutes, we have the Nicole Hemmer joining us tonight. I'm so excited to have her here. We're going to talk about yesterday's election and then put that away. And we're going to talk about how to defeat the right-wing media monster that seems to feed on the truth.
Yeah, like that. But before that, we need to remember what we're up against. Not that any of us have forgotten, but let's just take a quick look at last week in the Republican Party.
When do we get to use the guns? No, and I'm not, that's not a joke. I'm not saying it like that. I mean, literally, how many elections are they going to steal before we kill these people?
We have metal detectors outside of the House chambers because of me.
Today, I am calling for the creation of a formal commission to investigate the true origin of COVID-19, the role Fauci played in its creation, the false statements he made to members of Congress under oath, and why the hell Americans are funding the torture of puppies in Africa. Americans deserve the truth, and this demon doctor must never be allowed to escape justice.
Dr. Fauci would be right in there in the same room with people like Dr. Mengele and Dr. Zell, who worked for the Nazis.
My God, a parent did a Nazi salute at a school board because he thought the policies were oppressive.
God himself gave Donald Trump the strength and the courage and the wisdom to pardon me. On the morning I was arrested, at 6:06 in the morning, the night before I'd fallen asleep reading the Bible.
I'm constantly appalled and disgusted at how unqualified people are in Congress.
Well, just remember the key facts. The dossier was the Clinton campaign paying Perkins Coie, who hired Fusion, who hired Christopher Steele to create this fake dossier.
Randy Weingarten, who's the head of the most powerful teachers union in the country, she doesn't have a single child. If she wants to brainwash and destroy the minds of children, she should have some of her own and leave ours the hell alone.
Critical race theory is nothing more than state-sponsored racism.
There are a lot of communists that sit in our elected government currently.
I see Democrats who are envious of the Chinese Communist Party every day.
We need to get rid of this January 6th commission and replace it with a November 3rd commission.
And honestly, we have businesses that have been locked down and lives destroyed for over a year based on saying no COVID vaccine passports
Made in China.
Did Roger Stone say he fell asleep reading the Bible? That he was reading the Bible?
Totally believable.
Yeah.
I mean, who does not think that Roger Stone every night falls asleep reading the Bible, and that he would have like that direct line to God, so he would actually know that God chose Donald Trump to pardon him? Like, I don't know, maybe don't commit crimes that you have to have a direct line to God to get pardoned for.
Yeah.
But they're all a bunch of, they're such a bunch of fucking clowns. And, you know, some of them are the scary clowns, and some of them are just the bumbling idiot clowns, but they're all clowns. And so it is incredibly frustrating to see the Democrats over and over again be willing to respond to clowns, to let clowns set the agenda in the races, to decide what their messaging is going to be. So like the Democrats are running around with pie on their faces and trying to explain why they have pie on their faces, instead of like telling the Republicans to get back in the fucking Russian-made clown car and just get the fuck out.
I'm trying to picture what a Russian-made clown car would look like. But yes, I would like to see them get in and drive away. Did you say something about puppies? Is that what
we're paying to torture puppies? Apparently, didn't know that.
It's such a distraction, and we've talked about this before. It's such a distraction, but it's also infuriating, given the election results of last night, to think that that's what we're up against, and we can't come up with messaging to beat that. That right there is concerning. That's what's going to keep me up at night, is going, wait a second, this is what we can't beat. It feels like almost like when you're in a fight and the person's like throwing their arms around all over the place, and so it's just so crazy that you just stand there stunned, right? And so that's what it feels like. It's like the Democrats are completely stunned and need to actually start acting and deciding how this fight is going to be won. And so that is what we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we have someone like our guest tonight. She is a far-right media and conservative expert, a professor, a political historian, a columnist, and host of a really fascinating podcast, the Past Present Podcast. And she is the author of just a brilliant book, Messengers of the Right, Conservative Media and the Transformation of American Politics. Welcome to We're Speaking, Nicole Hemmer. We are so happy to have you here.
Yes. Hello, Nicole.
I am so happy to be here. And I should say, I have a puppy here. And when she heard about the torturing of puppies, she was very alarmed. So
she's going to get to the polls.
Messaging.
It is good messaging, I was going to say.
Yeah, that one I've got to go back and figure out what the hell that was, because somehow I missed this last week, like what the story was that somehow got twisted into we pay to torture puppies in Africa.
We need to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah. I'm sure that was really an accurate depiction that we got on what was going on. Anyway, Nicole, thank you for being here. We want to talk right-wing media and misinformation. It was a huge part of the race in Virginia, the critical race theory nonsense that is not taught in K through 12 schools in Virginia or anywhere else. But it worked. And you wrote a history of right-wing media, the book we just mentioned, Messengers of the Right. It was, or is, incredibly well researched and so comprehensive. What drove you to want to do a deep dive into right-wing media?
That's a great question. You know, I first got interested in the topic in 2004 when I was in graduate school, and I come from a conservative family, and I had come home that summer, and my dad told me that his project was to get me to vote for George W. Bush. And he reached over and he turned on the radio to Rush Limbaugh. And for me, I just wanted to make sense of that, right? Why did he connect voting to listening to the radio? And that got me into the world of right-wing media today. And once I uncovered a history of it, I was fascinated and felt like it was a really important story to tell.
Okay, so I love that that didn't devolve into like fighting with your dad. Like this seems to be like the first time that that's happened in a way that's actually positive. So I like that. I like that you decided to write a book about it, do research on it. So a critical part of right-wing media messaging is like, oh, we're the truth tellers. Only we have the truth, and it can be traced back. In your book, you say it can be traced back to the origin of 3 frustrated outsiders who wanted a platform. Is that still working, even though pretty much it's all lies and conspiracy, like kind of obvious lies and conspiracy?
Yes, I mean, it works incredibly well. And it's something that, the folks that I write about who were on radio in the 1950s and the 1960s and were publishing magazines, that was a really small group of people. They were powerful. They had real influence within the Republican Party, but they didn't have the kind of influence that Fox News or Glenn Beck and Sean Hannity have today. But that same idea that we are the ones who know the truth, and you have to tune into us, not only because we are right wing, but because we're right? Our ideology and reality line up. And if you listen to anyone else, you're going to be misled. And that idea has been a really powerful force in conservative media for more than half a century now.
So the power's in the spectacle, it seems, because, as we're watching last week in the Republican Party, we know a lot of that's generated by the right-wing media. And so that's a part of their power play, it seems.
Oh, absolutely. And this was something that actually conservative media activists in the 50s and 60s hadn't quite figured out. They would sometimes pull together protests and things like that. But that idea of these sort of pseudo events, right, creating a big spectacle around something like critical race theory, that's something that is an innovation of the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. And they keep coming back to it because it works incredibly well.
Yeah, it is. It's so effective, and it keeps coming back in different forms. And there's always, or so very often, a link back to fear of Black and brown people having power in the country. And so much of it goes back to racism. So let's talk about critical race theory and last night. We saw interviews with people who were questioned, why they were supporting Youngkin. And they said, because he opposes critical race theory. And if you ask them what critical race theory is, they're like, I don't know. I just know I don't like it. So except to say they don't like it, it really has worked as a very, very powerful tool that the right does use over and over again. So is this just our future, or is there a way to begin really battling the misinformation in an effective way?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is our future in the sense that as long as this keeps working, the right is going to continue to do it. Why would they stop? I mean, it's been effective politically, it's been effective culturally, it's been very effective economically. So we can expect these same kinds of repackaged campaigns, whether it's death panels in the ACA that we saw in 2009, if it's critical race theory. I mean, whatever the issue is, the same motivating forces are going to be driving these issues. But I do think that there is a takeaway for Democrats from the effectiveness of this kind of moral panic. Because as you've been doing, right, there's this tendency to say, well, look, they're not teaching Kimberly Crenshaw and Derek Bell in kindergarten. They're not teaching that kind of critical race theory. We can give you all this information on why that's not happening. We can talk about the racist origins of this as an issue. We can point out all of the manufactured campaigns that put this on the map. But voters are responding to the fear that taps into. There's an emotional impulse behind this. For some, it's racism. For some, it is this concern that has been percolating about schools for the last 18 months during the pandemic. They might not actually know much about critical race theory or care much about critical race theory, but it becomes this container for all of their frustrations with what's been happening with school closings and all of that. So you have all of that fear, and Democrats often respond with information and sometimes with values, but not necessarily with an emotional story that has the same kind of pull as the Republican messaging.
I love that you're talking about the alternative, which is to respond with another thing that evokes emotion. That's so important. And because when you talk about it being that it is our future, I'm like, no, no, please don't let it be. Because, like, for example, we're seeing with the Tucker Carlson miniseries, which I believe is not being pulled. I believe that is something that is going to air. It's like, is objective journalism, is it a thing anymore? Is it something that we can expect to see, hope to see? Did it ever exist?
That is a big question. I mean, there was this set of practices that journalists used in the 1930s and 40s and 50s that they called objectivity, right? That they were trying to be fact-based and reality-based, and they wanted to remove their emotion and their biases from their reporting. And that's evolved over time. I'm not sure that that kind of almost value-free neutrality is what we need in journalism right now. I mean, you used the phrase pro-democracy earlier, and it does seem like what we need is pro-democracy journalism. And that is something that is not neutral, right? It's not necessarily biased left or right, although right now, pro-democracy does map on pretty cleanly to liberalism versus conservatism or liberalism versus illiberalism. But we need a journalism that is committed to that value and is willing to go where that value takes them, even if it makes them appear to be biased towards liberalism in the eyes of conservative media. So that seems to be a better goal than just neutrality or some kind of pure form of objectivity.
Yeah, there's such an imbalance between the ecosystem for the conservative media and what the mainstream media is willing to do, as far as calling people out for their lies and being pro-democracy. And on the conservative side, they don't care. They're not worried that somebody's going to call them out for not being neutral. There's no longer any expectation on that side that you're going to be reasonably showing both sides of an issue or both positions that can be had on it. It was so frustrating still this morning to hear reporters talking about the election last night and saying, well, you know, one of the really successful things that Glenn Youngkin did is he ran on education. And it made me want to rip my teeth out. I'm like, you've got to be like, he did not run on education. And how do we get the mainstream media? What pressure can we bring to bear so that they're not either not taking this stuff seriously, or they're being so worried that they're going to be called out as being partisan that they let that stuff go?
So one of the things that folks can do is continue to call out those kinds of inaccuracies, because a statement like that Glenn Youngkin ran on education instead of Glenn Youngkin ran on a moral panic and racism, you're misinforming viewers, right? It's not like he ran on a new form of mathematics or greater funding for schools, right? He's not running on education, he's running on something else. So that's a misleading statement to say that it's education, and that needs to be pressured. I do think that there is some value in having an alternative media that is not trying to be mainstream objective news, not necessarily a liberal counterpart to Fox News. I think that there have been now decades of criticism of what conservative media do, how they detach from reality, how they spread racism, how they make democracy worse. You don't want to replicate that on the left. But you do want to have media that are able to connect liberals and people on the left who are able to help them forge a political identity, to turn them into activists, to give them training. Crooked Media does a really good job of this. So I think that there is space for that. And that's important because then that part of the media can put pressure on mainstream journalists and say, you know, you're getting a lot of pressure from your right, but you need to pay attention to the pressure from your left as well. And you might not get everything that you want out of that, but it does seem putting a little extra pressure on mainstream media from a different perspective would be useful in at least sort of backing journalists up and creating an alternative pressure.
I love this idea of alternative pressure, but you have talked about this hunger for hate news. And given that people can go and get their news from anywhere, from Facebook, from Twitter, like there's a different blog or podcast popping up every minute. Is there anything that tastes better than hate? Is there anything more sustainable?
It certainly is true, and we've seen study after study about this, that negative emotion really drives what people click, what they follow. I don't know how sustainable that is because it's not that it feels good. It's addictive, but I think that all of us have experienced using negative social media. It's something we experienced during the Trump years. If you were a Democrat, was so much of the news was driven by outrage. And how do you feel at the end of 5 years of that? Do your lives feel better? Do you feel like you're in an emotionally healthier place? I do think that there is room for a backlash to this kind of news environment that is driven so much by emotion. That, you know, that's not a perfect solution, right? But I do think that one place that you can look is look at the emotion that drove the 2008 campaign for Democrats versus the emotions that drove 2016 and 2020. There is space for positive emotion in politics that can bring people together, that can bring them out to vote in massive numbers, and that can make people feel good about participating in politics. Now, you're pushing back against a lot of other forces, and I don't want to be Pollyannish about it, but it does seem like there's space to at least try to cultivate that form of politics and that kind of media as an alternative for people who maybe want an escape ramp from the kind of media consumption they have today.
Yeah, and I think we can look as recently even as the 2020 campaign, because there were elements of that. Again, we had, trying to move suburban white women and talking to them about, what the Republicans want to believe you are, who they think you are. That's not who you are. Your kids are friends with children who are Black and brown. They go to school together. These are your friends. These are your coworkers. This is, this is not 1950. And those messages and the future that we want for our children, they did resonate. And they also made, I think, some white women feel uncomfortable about, like, I don't want to see myself that way. So I'm not going to vote for the guy who thinks I'm a racist. So why wasn't any of that used this year? I'm just really because we could see it worked.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And I think that is something that Democrats are going to have to look at, because the swing in white women, it was bigger among non-college educated white women than college educated white women, but college educated white women voted in much higher numbers for Youngkin than they did for Trump, according to exit polls. So this is a really important question. And I think at least part of it has to be, you can't just run against Trump. It's not as effective when he's not on the ballot. You have to have both a positive vision to put forward, but also an understanding of the extremism of the Republican Party as something that is not just defined by Donald Trump. We've seen these same tactics used for decades. And in fact, we saw pretty much these exact same tactics used around the ACA with the birth of the Tea Party in 2009. And that, too, studies have shown, was actually about racial resentment. And so learning from that and understanding that you can't just try to debunk what folks are saying. You can't just put Trump front and center, that you have to offer people something more. There's so much exciting stuff that's happening, for instance, around labor organizing right now. And there's a message that you can sell there that isn't about Donald Trump at all, and is about something positive and that can make better lives for people. And then all of the things that were possible in the Build Back Better bill about women being able to have children and have daycare and have parental leave and have all of these things that would make women's lives so much better, whether they chose to have children or not. I think that messaging was barely present in the McAuliffe campaign. And those are the kinds of things that Democrats are going to have to focus on in order to bring these white women back into the fold.
Yes, we need to give the white women hope. It's like, I was like, make democracy a yoga pose. I don't know. We'll figure it out. We're gonna figure it out.
To find a way to have like goat yoga at the polling places, and maybe we'll get suburban white women in there doing the right thing.
Yeah. We're gonna brainstorm on it for sure.
And if we can tie it to cross-class solidarity, that would be awesome too. So
that too. I would take that too. But if it takes Peloton, I'll do that too. You know, whatever works.
Whatever it takes.
Point for me. So you are a professor. I think of educators as truth tellers, but now the right is also trying to control that. What happens if they succeed?
It's a great question. I mean, the right's attacks on universities and K through 12 schools, that has been going on for decades, and they have succeeded in some places. The defunding of higher education, the defunding of schools more generally, is something that we're already dealing with. Now, I don't think that they're going to be able to silence all professors. I think that professors in general are a highly protected class, but by doing away with tenure lines, by forbidding professors to be part of court cases, these are silencing tactics. And I think that it has to be part of a broader restoring faith in institutions, refunding institutions. That's something that Democrats have to focus on, right? If you have this vision of education, for instance, being an important part of a democracy, you also have to be committed to funding schools, to funding higher education, to protecting academic freedom. That's something that Democrats have to focus on as well.
Yeah, they definitely do. It seems like so much of the time in these races, the Republicans are able to, create a straw man, and as they did with critical race theory, and then they can create a very simple solution to the manufactured outrage that they created. But they're really local issues that people can connect to on some level. And the Democrats tend to be somewhere up here having policy conversations and get very wonky about things. How would you advise Democrats to really connect on that local level? Because the big, Build Back Better, they're very loose concepts for people right now. But when you say your local school, that hits people in the gut. They're connected to that.
Yeah, I think that the Democratic Party has an issue right now where there's a Democratic leadership that is very focused on the national level and these national level issues. But, over the past 5 years, we've seen so much local activism in groups like Indivisible, who were responding to real community issues. And so there is community organizing that's already there and already happening. And Democrats really need to activate that and to understand that they need to be responsive, just as you were saying, to local issues. People want to feel heard. They're desperate to feel heard and to see their concerns reflected. And they want it reflected at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level. And Democrats are a party that are very connected to common people and what they need. They just need to do a better job of talking to those people and making it clear that they hear and understand the things that they need.
Sounds like a plan. I like it.
It's that simple.
It's that simple,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So we'll just do that. Yeah.
Nicole, this has been absolutely fantastic and informative. I urge people to go check out Nicole's book, Messengers of the Right. There's lots of good tidbits in there about the history of right-wing media and kind of how we got to today. So it is excellent stuff. We'd love to have you back sometime because I feel like there's so much more to talk about.
Just scratch the surface.
Yeah, very much so.
Really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for all of your great questions.
Thank you very much for being here.
Okay, we have a plan.
Yeah, we have a plan. Yep.
Yoga. That's for me. I go to the yoga classes with my plate. I'm not kidding. That's going in.
Yeah, I love her tie back to optimism. You know, there are ways to connect people on highly emotional issues on a real gut level that isn't fear and it's not hate. But when that stuff is coming from the other side, Democrats can't shy away from that. You've got to take that head on and be willing to call bullshit on stuff early, not when the election is upon you and you realize that things are tight. You define your opponent before they define you. It's like kind of 101.
Yeah.
And you've got to get better at that.
Yeah. Yep. Do it quickly and then set the agenda so that we're not always playing defense. It's like call them out for who they are, set the agenda, and then play that game.
Right. Don't run around explaining why you have pie on your face. That is not a winning strategy.
Never has been. No.
Well, speaking of winning strategies, we have the breakdown on tomorrow night, which is always incredibly educational. Tara Setmayer and Rick Wilson will be on at 7:00 Eastern for Pacific, and they're going to be joined by Michael Steele, which is always a good time. So yeah, make sure you tune into that one.
Yes, and we will be back next week, same time, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And please ask us questions. You can hashtag #AskWe'reSpeaking, and we will answer them on the show. So you can do that. Now, just stay tuned for a message from Ryan Wiggins of the Lincoln Project, and we will see you next week. Good night.
Night, everybody.
Hi. I'm Ryan Wiggins at the Lincoln Project, and there's a lot going on we need to talk about. Trump's been hinting at a 2024 presidential run using the big lie that the 2020 election was stolen from him, and it's working. New polls show fewer Republicans are willing to hold the January 6th rioters criminally responsible. Meanwhile, GOP-controlled states are leading voter suppression campaigns nationwide. The Lincoln Project is working to neuter the current GOP-controlled government to ensure that future elections are fair and democratic and to put power back in the hands of the people where it belongs. But we can't do it without you. Go to lincolnproject.us/donate to join in our long-term fight for democracy. We're honored to have you with us, and we're not letting up.